Bear down. Today at Bears News Fans, we've got 3 stories that have my brain completely fired up. And I'm going to try to stay calm, but I'm not making any promises. First, Maxx Crosby. The man with 10 sacks last year, 5 straight Pro Bowls. The edge rusher Baltimore almost brought in and then backed out on like they got cold feet at the altar. The rumor came back to life, and there are layers here nobody is reading correctly. Second, Illinois just dropped new legislation to keep the Bears in Arlington Heights. State Representative Martin McLaughlin filed the Taxpayer and Investment Protection Act this week. And honestly, it sounds smarter than anything Springfield has tried before. But there is a massive problem with this story, and that problem has a name. JB. Pritzker. And third, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, the pass rusher the Bears brought in at the 2025 trade deadline expecting some sparks, just retired from the NFL at 27 years old. Yeah, 27. Right after the Eagles minicamp. No ceremony, no farewell tour, just one line in the transactions wire that says, reserve for retired. And fam, that tells you everything about where the edge rush situation really stands on this team. Let's get into it. All right, I'm going to start with a fan confession. When the Maxx Crosby to the Bears rumors died, because Baltimore initially accepted him and then sent him back like a cold pizza, I thought that was it. I thought the window had closed, that Ryan Poles would turn the page and find another path to fix the edge rush. And then this week, a report from Raiders on SI puts Crosby's name back in the market, saying the interest that exists makes it a viable potential subject. And I had to sit down for a second, because this is not just any rumor. This is the rumor that refuses to die. Let's put the context on the table first, because this matters for understanding why Crosby specifically is such a big deal for this franchise right now. The Bears have Montez Sweat. Sweat hit double-digit sacks for the 2nd straight season. He's ascending, and he is genuinely one of the best edge rushers in the NFC. That part is solid. The problem is everything behind Sweat on the depth chart. Dayo Odeyingbo had 1 sack in 8 games before he tore his Achilles. Austin Booker had 4.5 sacks in 10 games, which is promising, but Booker is 23 years old and still hasn't proven he can sustain that pace over a full 16-week schedule against starting caliber opponents. And Shamar Turner got hurt too early in his rookie year to give us a real sample of what he can be. What does that depth chart add up to? 1 elite player and a giant question mark after him? And in the NFL, if your plan at edge rusher depends on everything breaking right with unproven guys, you're gambling, you're not building. Now let's talk about why Maxx Crosby specifically solves that problem in a way that no available free agent right now can. Crosby is 30 years old. He signed a 3-year, $106.5 million extension with Las Vegas back in March of 2025. He had knee surgery in January of this year, which is exactly what made Baltimore back out of the original deal. But Crosby himself has said publicly he expects to be ready for training camp in July. That matters because it means the short-term medical risk is manageable if you trust the recovery process. But here's what separates Crosby from any available free agent option. It's not just his individual production. It's what his presence does to the rest of the defense. When you have Crosby and Sweat on the same defensive end rotation, opposing offensive coordinators cannot design protections that effectively contain both of them. You have to pick which one you're going to dedicate extra resources to. And whoever you leave uncovered is going to cause damage. That, in terms of gap integrity and pressure design, is exactly what Dennis Allen needs for his defensive system to function at a playoff level. 1 elite edge rusher is not enough when the other side of the field is predictable. Last year, offenses could slide protections towards Sweat and leave the other side relatively clean. With Crosby on the other end, that solution goes away. Now, look, I could be wrong about some of this. I want to be honest about what concerns me about this trade because I'm not here to sell you cheap hype. The price. Baltimore sent 2 first-round picks to get Crosby before backing out. That tells us something about how Las Vegas values this player. They're demanding elite compensation. And the Bears have first-round picks they're going to need. They're not in full rebuild mode, sure, but they're also not in a now or never window where selling off the future is the only logic. They still have offensive line depth to build around Caleb Williams. They still need help at multiple spots. So how much is too much for Crosby? Here's my position, and some of you may push back. If the price is 2 first-round picks, I'm not doing it. Not at this point in roster construction. But if the price is 1 first-rounder and some day 2 capital, a mid-round pick plus a depth piece, then yes, I make that move. Because what Crosby does to this defense in terms of immediate impact on Super Bowl odds over the next 2 to 3 years justifies that investment. And here's the tactical angle that I find most interesting, and that nobody's really digging into. Crosby comes from a defensive system in Las Vegas that is fundamentally different from Dennis Allen's scheme. Allen runs a base 4 philosophy, 2 high structures. The idea being that if you can rush with 4 and play sound coverage behind it, you don't need exotic blitz packages. Crosby in Tampa and in Vegas was deployed more as an individual motor player. They schemed around his athleticism rather than plugging him into a system. The real question isn't whether Crosby can be good in Allen's system. The question is whether he can be the type of disruptive player in the passing game when Allen wants to drop 8 and let the front 4 do the work. I'm inclined to think yes, bro, and here's why. Crosby and Allen's defense, surrounded by Tremaine Edmonds covering the intermediate, and Jalen Johnson locking down the perimeter. That's a situation where Crosby's individual pass rush reads become simpler because the coverage behind him is competent. When the secondary handles its job, the edge rusher doesn't have to win in 1.5 seconds. He has 2 or even 3 seconds sometimes, and for a player with Crosby's burst-to-power combination, that extra time is the difference between a pressure and a sack. There's one more element of this trade dynamic that nobody is talking about, the internal situation in Las Vegas. Crosby spent years being the anchor of that franchise when it was a competitive disaster. He was the guy who stayed, who talked about commitment to Las Vegas, who represented continuity on a team that had none of it. And now there are rumblings that both sides may want to move on. When a player of that caliber and that competitive mentality starts looking for the exit, it means he's ready to seriously chase a ring. The Bears are a team that earned the 2 seed in the NFC last year with a 22-year-old franchise quarterback. If you want to win a Super Bowl, that's exactly the situation you want to land in. I don't know if this trade closes. Vegas might ask for too much, and polls might pass. Another team like the Commanders or the Eagles might come in with a more aggressive offer. But what I do know is that the next 30 days of this offseason, between now and the start of training camp, are when this type of move gets decided. And Ryan Poles has the draft capital, the salary cap space, and the quarterback to justify going to get him. Fam, tell me in the comments, do you pay 2 first-round picks for Maxx Crosby? I want to read every single response because this is the real conversation of the offseason. And speaking of urgency, because what just happened in Springfield carries that same level of tension about the future of this franchise in Illinois. Republican State Representative Martin McLaughlin from Barrington Hills filed House Bill 5797 this week, calling it the Taxpayer and Investment Protection Act. And before you roll your eyes and dismiss this as another political attempt with no real substance, hear me out, because this proposal has real differences from everything that was tried before. First, the money. The state of Illinois would commit $1.2 billion in infrastructure spending, not to build the stadium itself, that's on the Bears, but for the surrounding development, roads, public transit, utilities, the kind of investment that turns an abandoned suburban racetrack into a functioning economic district. That piece existed in earlier versions of the debate, but here's what McLaughlin says makes this proposal different: the fiscal transparency mechanism. Instead of creating complicated tax exemption structures that give political opponents ammunition to talk about gimmicks and hidden subsidies, this proposal establishes a negotiated property tax rate right from the start, anchored to the $200 million the Bears paid for the Arlington Heights land. That rate, which McLaughlin estimates between $300 and $500 million, grows by 2.5% every single year for 30 years. An independent third-party auditor reviews all parties involved, the Bears, the state, and the local taxing bodies, annually. No hidden costs, no surprise renegotiations. A straight business deal with fixed numbers and public accountability. That, as a political proposal structure, is considerably harder to attack than the pilot mechanisms that got torpedoed before. When your opponent says the Bears are getting $1.5 billion in exemptions, you can answer, there are no exemptions. There's a fixed rate that everyone knows up front, and an auditor verifying it every single year. But here's the problem that nobody can ignore. Governor J.B. Pritzker responded to this proposal with what, if I'm being real with you, was basically a shrug. He said that randomly putting in a bill that might be your idea or Rep. McLaughlin's idea doesn't necessarily solve the problem of what the Bears actually want. And he pointed to 2 bills already passed separately in the House and Senate that could be reconciled. The implication is clear. Pritzker does not want to publicly lead this until the Bears explicitly say what they want. And that frustrates me deeply. Because what the governor is saying in unfiltered political language is that he doesn't want to push the deal publicly until the Bears put their own approval on the line. He wants the Bears to save the proposal, not him. And the Bears, for their part, are not going to do that publicly while Indiana is still a viable alternative on the table, because doing so would destroy their negotiating leverage. The result is a political loop where everyone is waiting for someone else to move first, while the Bears' decision clock on the stadium keeps running. Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch added that it's important to see whether all stakeholders can reach agreement before calling a special legislative session. And Ripus Mero. Dan Ugaste is also expected to file his own Bears-related legislation this week. So in the coming days, there could be not one, but potentially 3 separate stadium bills in Springfield, and that, which might sound like momentum, could actually mean the opposite: more fragmentation, more debate about which proposal is the right one, and less time to build real consensus. My honest position on the Taxpayer and Investment Protection Act, it is the smartest proposal I've seen come out of Springfield throughout this entire process. It has structure, it has transparency, it has an annual accountability mechanism. If I'm Ryan Poles looking at this from Hallas Hall, this is the proposal that generates the most genuine optimism of anything Illinois has put on the table so far. But the problem is that optimism and certainty are very different things. And what the Bears need right now is certainty, not optimism. They need to know that if they commit to Arlington Heights, the fiscal deal is locked and it's not going to shift. A proposal filed 4 days after the regular legislative session closed, without the governor's explicit backing, without knowing if it has the votes to pass in a special session, is not certainty. It is a signal that Illinois still wants to fight for them, and that matters. But it is not enough yet. And to close things out, I need to talk about Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. Not because his retirement changes anything about the current Bears roster. He's already gone. But because his story says something very specific about the real situation at edge rusher for this franchise. And I want to make sure we understand what it's actually telling us. Tryon-Shoyinka was a first-round pick by Tampa Bay in 2021. 6'5", 259, impressive athletic profile on paper. The Bucs were coming off their Super Bowl LV win with Tom Brady and were hoping he'd complement Shaquille Barrett and Jason Pierre-Paul on the edge. It didn't happen. In 66 games with Tampa, he piled up 35 quarterback hits but only 15 sacks. He was getting there, and then not finishing. That's a technique and leverage problem, not an effort problem. The Browns took a shot on him in 2025, trying to see if a change of scenery helped. It didn't. And when the Bears acquired him at the trade deadline, sending a 6th-round pick to Cleveland in exchange for him and a 7th, the idea was to give depth to a pass rush group that had already lost Odeyingbo and Turner to season-ending injuries. In 8 games with Chicago, he totaled 13 tackles and 1 tackle for a loss over 111 defensive snaps. Not nearly enough. And then he ended up in the concussion protocol late in the year, missing the regular season finale and both playoff games. The Bears didn't make him a contract offer. He hit free agency, signed with Philly, went through their OTAs and mandatory minicamp, and this week the Eagles placed him on the reserve or retired list at 27 years old. 27 years old. That stops me. I'm not going to turn this into something dramatic because I genuinely don't know the personal reasons behind his decision. There may be medical factors, there may be things going on in his personal life that are none of our business. And the man deserves respect for 5 seasons in this league. Making it to the NFL as a first-round pick is something very few people ever accomplish. But from a franchise perspective, this retirement serves as a reminder of something we can't sugarcoat. The Bears gambled in November that Tryon-Shoyinka could provide real depth on the edge, and it didn't work. And the pattern of this offseason, no meaningful free agency additions at defensive end, no edge rushers taken in the draft, counting on Booker and Turner to make a leap and on Odeyingbo to fully recover from a torn Achilles, is exactly the kind of bet that can turn a promising season into a frustrating one. And that, directly and without detour, is why the Maxx Crosby rumor that opened this video carries so much weight. It's not hype for the sake of hype. It's because this franchise genuinely needs to solve the pass rush if it wants to make a real Super Bowl run in 2026. That's everything I've got for today, fam. And listen, I know it's one of those days where the news gives you hype and leaves you with questions at the same time. Maxx Crosby can dramatically change what this defense looks like if Ryan Poles decides to go get him. Illinois might be taking its final steps to keep the franchise home, and this time with a proposal that has more real substance than anything before it. And the Tryon-Shoyinka retirement reminds us that talent doesn't guarantee anything, and that the Bears need to fix the edge rush now. Not in training camp hoping for miracles. Caleb Williams is in year 2 of the system. Ben Johnson is growing into being a head coach. This window is open right now. The only question is whether this front office is going to be aggressive enough to take full advantage of it. Bear down. If this video gave you something, drop a like, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments. Do you pay 2 first-round picks for Maxx Crosby, yes or no? I want to read every single answer. See you in the next one.